Hello, you guys, and welcome to another edition of Castcast. I'm your host, Casty Streeter, and without further ado, this video is obviously to tell you who my picks are for Super Wildcard Weekend. And obviously starting off with the Chargers going to go play the Texans. This game, obviously, the Chargers had clinched a playoff spot a couple of weeks ago. They did win their game, in week 18. The Texans also won, but I'm going to have to say this, Tennessee had them on the ropes, in that game, and it wasn't really, a clean win. Obviously, they didn't play, Stroud, and that sort of thing. But you look at, Houston's season, and obviously a division winner, mainly because Tennessee struggled. The Jaguars struggled way more than anybody thought. And then of course Indianapolis, as we know, just had a collapse, 2 weeks before the end of the season, eliminating them from playoff contention. But anyway, going and looking at this game, we've got two of the most dynamic, I think, pass rushes in the league in terms of their edge rushers. Obviously, with the Chargers, where you have Khalil Mack, who's been playing very, very well this year, and Joey Bosa, who even have, Bud Dupree backing them up, who I think, on a lot of teams could potentially be a starter. And then on Houston, as we know, Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, who they acquired in the offseason. All four are healthy, and I expect that to really dictate this game. Obviously, when looking at the Texans, they led up the second most sacks in the league. Their line really didn't look that good, this season. And overall, I think that the way the Chargers defense has been playing, with it being much, much, much improved, with a new system, as they had moved on from obviously their old head coach and their old system to Harbaugh and his defensive coordinator system, they proved that they were one of the better defenses in the league. They held down quite a lot of teams to low points this season. And I think that for CJ Stroud, I think that he's definitely looked off. It doesn't help that they don't have Tank Dell. Nico Collins is essentially going to be their main threat guy, which I think, the Chargers are just not going to let him, take control of the game. And then you look at Joe Mixon on the Texans, not a bad season, but not a great season. You see splashes here and there, and just overall, it's one of those things that looking at this, I just don't think the Texans are going to compete in this game. I think that Harbaugh's going to control the game. I think he's going to, run the ball a lot, obviously with, their running back Dobbins. But I'm also thinking that, Herbert is going to cook against this banged up DB core. And, they don't really have, they have Derek Stingley Jr., who, is their young star cornerback. But with the way that Justin Herbert distributes the ball over, he's going to be able to either avoid Stingley or pick his shots at Stingley. And it's not going to affect him. And not to mention, I think that the Chargers O-line is a lot better, than the Texans O-line. So they're going to be able to protect Herbert a lot better. They're going to be able to give him more time, you would think, than Stroud is going to get, in this game. So overall, I just think that this is an uphill battle for the Texans. I think they're too banged up. I think at certain key spots in this game. And I think that overall their O-line just isn't going to allow them to really progress past the wild card round. So I'm picking the Chargers, for likely a dominant win. at Houston. But then again, this is the playoffs, and I think that, you really see, just unpredictable things in the playoffs, to be honest with you, with the way that players know that this is maybe gut check time. And if I'm going to be a player worth their weight in metal, in this league, it is gut check time. But that's all I'm going to say about this game. Chargers win. Moving on, we then have the Ravens hosting the Steelers. The Steelers, as we all know, had a colossal collapse, at the end of the year. I just really think that, the locker room isn't in a good spot. They've lost 4 straight now at the end of the year, starting with Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, and then Cincinnati. And it's like Russell Wilson in that time, it looks to me, only passed for not even 500 yards. 600 or 700 yards in 4 games, which is terrible. Yeah, and then you look at, obviously they had missed Pickens, who came back, but then you see this low effort and you see all the drama that he's creating, and you just wonder what's going on with Pittsburgh. I don't think I've ever seen them have an end of the season like this, or for people to think that Tomlin doesn't have control of his team. I think that there's a certain players that they've, that have potentially become too big of a problem. And we could really see, I wouldn't say a lot of changes in the offseason, but depending on what goes on in the playoffs, I just, I'm concerned for Pittsburgh. But getting to my analysis of the game, obviously when these 2 teams last met, it was Baltimore, hosting the Steelers, in their last meeting. As we all know, one of the last 3 wins that the Steelers had was against Baltimore, 18-16, where, Lamar just didn't play well. And I remember the vibe of that game was just that, like, the Ravens were too cute. And then in this last one, they really were like, we're going to go and we're going to take care of business to prove that this is our division. With superior quarterback play, a superior offense, and a defense that has improved drastically from the beginning of the year. The Baltimore defense was one of the crazier stories, where it's like first half of the year, they're one of the worst in the league. Many of the reason why I think that they were losing games, because they just couldn't close out really. And then in the later half of the year, goodness, they have been cooking. They switched some things up, sorted some things out, and now they're looking like a dangerous team come playoff time. And obviously, as we all know, if this was the way the Ravens played the whole year, there's, a good chance to me that they would have been the 1 seed. They obviously came close even against the Chiefs week 1. They... And just, just against many other good teams as well, and obviously, their offense has really come along with Todd Monken's system. So looking at this, I think it's kind of asinine that I guess they say that Baltimore are 10-point favorites, just because it is the playoffs and these players, they might set differences aside and really put it on the line here. And, in a divisional game like this, I just don't expect 2 games in a row to go that heavily in Baltimore's favor. Don't get me wrong, I picked Baltimore to win this game because overall I just think that their defense has started to play a lot better. And I think that, the magic of Russ, and I definitely don't avoid saying that I don't like Russell Wilson. I think that, he's really old. He's washed. He's never been that great of a quarterback in the league, unless supported by a top tier defense. And the defense for Pittsburgh hasn't been as good of late. It's sad for me to say this because TJ Watt hasn't been hurt. But I guess it just looks like, teams have finally figured him out and they need other people to step up. But I just don't see it against Baltimore. I am picking Baltimore to win this game and to advance to the divisional round over the Steelers. Our next game on Sunday morning, or I guess Sunday afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, is Bills Broncos. Obviously, looking at this game, the Bills had nothing really to play for last week. They rested Allen and they played Trubisky. I guess they did play Allen a little bit, but looking at this game, I think that Denver's going to really have their hands full. I think that their defense is really, really good, but I think that the spread offense that the Bills run is going to make it so that they can essentially make guys like Patrick Surtain kind of inert, throw the ball away from him because he's having a great year. Running the football, obviously Denver's pass rush has been very, very good this year. A lot better than I think anybody expected because they haven't really had a pass rush since they had Von Miller however many years ago. So looking at this, it does kind of suck as well that they don't have Alex Singleton playing. But, Cody Barton's, a younger player who's been kind of making splashes on their team. Then you look at, their offense, obviously led by Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix, could potentially still be in the running for Rookie of the Year. And then Jaleel McLaughlin has been playing, better, earning his starting position on the roster. And then Courtland Sutton, who I think, many wouldn't say he's a top 10 wide receiver because he's not the flashiest. He's not the guy like a Jefferson or a Jamar Chase that can go, 30 some yards downfield and just essentially disappear and make these DBs look like fools. But he does have one of the better third down conversion catch rates in the league. He is very, very dominant in that aspect, and he is a very clutch player and the kind of player you want with your young QB. They are going to need Sutton. Obviously they needed him in the regular season, but in playoff scenarios, you're going to need guys that are going to be able to take care of the ball, aren't a risk, and are going to, give you a sure-handed target to be able to catch the ball. Now, looking at the defense for the Bills, obviously the Bills, as we know, Ed Oliver has been, playing very well lately. I think that he's been really making a splash. I think that he's really playoff ready. I expect him to really turn it up, type of thing. And then you look at, the defensive backs, Teron Johnson, very good, healthy. Rasul Douglas, healthy, long-armed corner. And, and then Christian Benford has been playing very well. So I think it's going to be a tough task for the rest of the Denver receivers to be able to get separation and to be able to produce at a high level in this game. And I don't think I really need to mention that the Broncos, while they do have, a better pass rush than expected, they are going up against one of the better lines in the league, to be honest with you. A very strong unit. They don't really put Allen in danger very much, and it's so hard to contain him, and, the overall look of this game, too, in the cold, is that I think that the running game of the Bills, where you got James Cook, who had 1,004 yards in the regular season, Ray Davis, and then Ty Johnson, who all accumulated for over I think they all had over 500 yards. I just think that they're going to be able to come at Denver in a plethora of ways that they're not going to be expecting because of their loaded halfback room, where, you know, Cook is obviously a star. I don't think he's quite on the level of you know, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, you know, or that sort of thing. But I think that, you know, he's getting there, or a Jahmyr Gibbs, you know, but he's very serviceable. He's very knowledgeable, and he is kind of that play away from, you know, having it. He gets pretty good speed. But I just don't see Denver being able to contain every single weapon and every single way that the Buffalo Bills can get yards in this game and first downs. So I'm obviously going with the Bills. I really don't expect them to be a first round exit against a team like the Broncos, you know, who were obviously the seventh seed. And that's my prediction for the game, is that the Bills win at home to progress to the divisional round. Moving on, we have my Packers playing the Eagles over in Philadelphia. As many people know, these two teams played on Friday night, you know, in week 1 in Brazil. Now, I've been avoiding what people are saying about this game because I want to stay true to my own take. And my own take is that this game could be, you know, even closer than the 5-point difference that separated these two teams, you know, in week 1. I think in week 1, you looked at the field conditions. Neither defense played well that night. And you obviously had at the end of the game the Love injury, and then Malik Willis having to just kind of be thrown in after not being on the team for very long. And, you know, the rest is history. I think that this game has a very, very much different dynamic than the week 1. And that is primarily because of the defenses. Now, we look at Philadelphia's defense. They're allowing, I think, the second least points in the league, you know, to finish the season or something like that. Or maybe the first. They might. I'm pretty sure they're first. Then you look at the Green Bay Packers. Many people wanted to point out to me that they think that the Packers' run defense just isn't very good. I saw things after last week's games where, you know, we lost to obviously the Bears, you know, disappointing as a Packers fan to say the least. And they said that the Bears ran all over us. And I was like, they only averaged, you know, 3 yards a carry. The last game, and it was against a very good team, as we saw Sunday night, that the Packers let up over 100 yards in the rushing game, was against the Lions. And this was a Lions team that still had Montgomery and Gibbs. You know, a team that, you know, couldn't run as well as they would have liked. Now, it's kind of potato with the Eagles and the Lions. They both have elite running attack offenses because of their O-lines and because of the backs they employ. The Lions do it differently in the sense that, hey, we plug in Gibbs when we want to have a burner, a stretch play. We put in Montgomery for that tough running situation. But he can also, you know, get good gains because he still has, you know, pretty good speed for a power guy. Saquon Barkley, as we know, did not play last week. They obviously wanted him to have the freshest legs he could possibly have. You know, which, you know, to me was kind of sad. I was like, you know, you should play him for a drive. He should get the record. I think him and that O-line are deserving. I wouldn't say Saquon alone is deserving, you know, just because we do have guys like Derrick Henry, who I think, you know, is still better than Barkley, you know, not by a huge margin, but it's just unbelievable what Henry is doing. But regardless of that and my rambling, here's what I think it's going to come down to. And I hate to put this game on this kind of a thing, but I think it comes down to whether or not Jalen Hurts plays. He hasn't played since December 22nd. So looking at this game, that's happening on the 12th. You obviously have, it'll have been 3 weeks since he had been in a game. And, a plethora of games, obviously. If he does not play, to me, you don't have as much of a passing attack. And you don't have that mobility to, have a running quarterback, which has been their MO. They really have struggled this year to pass it consistently. You look at the Eagles, I don't think that they had a 300-yard passing game, which to me, when they talk about having weapons like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and I mean, obviously Dallas Goedert had missed some time, but Goddard is, still a very, very good tight end. I just think that it's, precocious to say that they're going to beat you through the air. Now, I understand that A.J. Brown is a very good, first down maker in short yardage situations. But the thing is that they don't, it has to be like a lawn, third down, which they just don't see very much of. And I'll say this. They just stick to their identity, of doing the tush push, of doing that sort of thing in short yardage situations. And I just think that with the way that the Packers have been playing, the Philadelphia Eagles are going to have to beat them somewhat through the air, and you look at, how many, there haven't been very many teams that have had a 100-yard, receiver against the Packers this year. And people want to poke fun that, oh yeah, Jair, he got burned on opening night. He's not playing because he's obviously hurt, but the secondary for the Packers has played a lot better lately. Again, and it's not like it's against, these guys that are nobodies. They held, the combination of Addison and Jefferson to under 200 yards, combined, when they played them. And essentially the way, the reason why the Packers, had kind of lost that game and at other games recently is because of, unnecessary turnovers. The Jacobs fumble against the Vikings where they were driving on the field really messed up the mojo and, the momentum in that game a lot. The Reed fumble, against, the Bears last week. I hate to say it, but it was against Jalen Johnson, who is, a savvy corner in the league. There's just, these are playoff run ending mistakes type of thing. And I just hope that, while it hasn't been the same player, each week and different things have happened, I think that, you're looking from good QB play from Love, who hasn't thrown a pick in a while now. And, it does suck that, Christian Watson is gone. But I think that, you're going to Philadelphia, you're going to a place, that is loud, and you're just going to want to try and play, bruisery football. And I think that, it's hard to beat a team once, if not even, it's hard, it's not hard to beat a team once a year, but to beat them twice is just one of those things that, I think people are overlooking. I know that I'm dawdling on this game for a while, but I just think that, I think that people don't think that this game's going to be as close as it's going to be just because they're looking at it, with Green Bay having, ended the season kind of rough but barring a couple of other, barring the couple of mistakes that I mentioned, I think the Packers could have easily been 13-4, or even with maybe one more win. So it's one of those things that it's like the Eagles, obviously they've had this dominant run game. But the other thing that I want to point out, and people always bring this up early in the season when teams are winning, they're like, oh, who have they played? Who have they played? Type of thing. The Philadelphia Eagles this year, to me, the best teams that they played was Washington, Baltimore, and then can I even say Pittsburgh? Because Pittsburgh's last 4 weeks, clearly they were really bad, type of thing. And I guess, looking at their schedule now, Hurts did have a 300-yard passing game, but it was against the Saints in week 3. Otherwise, there's a good amount of games even under 200. And then, you do have the Pittsburgh game where he threw for 290, but as we all know, the Steelers just haven't looked good lately, so it's like, you're looking at, and then, obviously, they lose to Washington in that game where Hurts exits and that sort of thing. And then they got to lean on the run. I remember that game being that the Commanders just didn't really put up a run defense, to be honest with you. And it's just like, you look at, this team, the Eagles team, are they as battle tested against better competition? And maybe that makes it that their path to the, playoffs was a little bit easier and, that sort of thing. But they haven't played the upper echelon of teams this year. Don't get me wrong. I think that the Eagles are a good team. But it's like when you don't play up against the upper echelon, there has to be some sort of doubt. It's like if you played, a 17-game season, your whole division didn't make the playoffs, and then you were playing, the other, you were matched up against another division with only one playoff team. And that's what, and that's kind of what the Eagles, played this year. It's like if we go over their schedule, obviously week 1 they played against Green Bay. Nobody knows whether either of these teams were going to be playoff teams after, with how young the Packers were. Obviously the additions were good, and the Eagles had collapsed last year. So they, we were obviously, good offseason, great, but you still have to put it together. Then they play Atlanta, a team that ended up not being very good week 2, and they lost that game. New Orleans at the time, had a 2-0 record, but obviously we know they weren't a very good team. Tampa Bay week 3, they lose. Tampa Bay, as we know, I wouldn't say squeaked into the playoffs, but they were one loss away from having it be a dicey where they don't control their own destiny. Cleveland bad, New York bad. I'll say it, Cincinnati was bad this year defensively, and that wasn't even when Joe Burrow was putting on a clinic in the later half of the season. Jacksonville bad, Dallas bad, Washington, yes, they won. Rams, their up and down season. Baltimore good. So you're looking at, if you look at this, they only played like 5 other playoff teams this year. Whereas it's like the Packers and I know everyone's sick of hearing it, but it's like we were in the toughest division this year. The only other division with 3 teams that made it was obviously the Chiefs division, where the Chiefs made it. And then you have the Chargers and the Broncos. And the Broncos, obviously, as we know, were handed a playoff berth. But, it was always a lock for almost Green Bay, Minnesota, and, the Lions to make it this year. Halfway through the season, it was, crazy odds if they had lost enough to get knocked out. But it's like, to me, I think that, strength of schedule does come down to really show and build a team and make them progress. So for people that are saying that the Packers are just going to be, demolished in this game, like, I'm sorry, I'm a realist. And while I might be a Packers fan, I'm still being real, that I'm not thinking that, we're going to be demolished. And if Hurts doesn't play, I'm sorry, but there's a reason Kenny Pickett isn't a starter, and there's a reason he ended up leaving Pittsburgh. He didn't want a QB competition. He just had a lot of disdain for that. And I just, Kenny Pickett, while he could have a great game, knock on wood, I just think that, this game's going to be a lot closer. And I'm going to say this. I think that my Packers win this game, because I think that, they're really ready to put the league on notice. And, this Packers team, is going to be gung-ho and, ready to go after two kind of brutal losses. So moving on, we have Sunday Night Football. We have the Commanders playing the Buccaneers. As we know, the Buccaneers, they won last week, securing their playoff spot. And the Commanders, they also won in kind of a very gritty game where they won as time expired, But looking at this game, I'm not going to lie. I think this is one of the harder games to predict. I think that the Buccaneers are very, very good. I think they've got the veterans. I think they've got the experience needed, But then you have the Commanders and the magic of Jaden Daniels and, Scary Terry. And while I won't say that Scary Terry's the best wide receiver in this game, because I still think Evans he cooks, he's really good and all of that, but I just think that the 1-2 tandem on the Buccaneers is a little bit better than the tandem on the Commanders. You look at, they obviously don't have Godwin. I am not speaking of Godwin. I am speaking about, is it McMillan? I feel bad for not knowing his name. Yes, Jalen McMillan has been doing very, very, very well. And, and then you've got Sterling Shepard, who's been doing good. Obviously, Mike Evans is, a lot of playoff experience, tied Jerry Rice's record for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. And then Baker Mayfield has really been playing really, really well, I think, this year. He did throw a little bit more picks than, you would want, but I do remember watching several of the games that it's like not every one of the picks was his fault. Catches, tipped up from his own wide receivers and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, it's likely to happen to almost every quarterback, but I think that Baker Mayfield, is really trying to make his name in Tampa and show, that he does belong as a good postseason quarterback. He obviously doesn't have, that much experience, in the postseason. If anything, I didn't check up on that, but I think that, his chemistry with Evans, with McMillan, I think that they've been really doing really, really well. And McMillan has been a very intriguing rookie wide receiver to me this year. And, the emergence of him, I remember when Evans and Godwin were both hurt, and people, they were saying on how, are they going to go and they're going to go after somebody? And they were like, no, we believe in the guys in this locker room. Even Trey Palmer, who's listed as their fifth wide receiver, Ryan Miller doing well. They get so many guys involved on this offense, and then their running back. I love Bucky Irving. He's been doing really, really well. And he just gives you that hope that, like, he's always liable to be taking a big run. And then Rachaad White and the emergence of this running attack from Tampa Bay behind this good O-line as well, led by Tristan Wirfs. Cody Mock, being a baller, Graham Barden, and, Luke Gedeke and Ben Bredesen, they get that bread. No pun intended with Bredesen. This line is very, very good and I think somewhat underrated, And then the defense, led by Vita Vea, Lavonte David, and Antoine Winfield Jr., who has been a little bit banged up this year, but is still a phenomenal safety. That it is hard. It's hard for these guys to not, have an impact with their talent level, and they're very, very good at it. So it's like looking at the Commanders. The Commanders, obviously, Jaden Daniels has been dealing with a small injury. He is definitely going to play. I have no doubt about that. He's proven his toughest this year. You look at this team, though, and it's like, yeah, there's Scary Terry, but they don't have, Zach Ertz, I love it how he's been balling, how he's been really contributing to this team, and that sort of thing. But I just wonder if they're really going to be able to, they're going to have to rely on Daniel's arm a lot. And either that or they're going to have to do a lot of outside runs, because I just don't really think you can run inside very well against the Buccaneers. As we know, Vita Vea is he's a stud. He's, the run stuffer extraordinaire, size, power, and even good speed for that. I remember when the Buccaneers slid him out to coverage to make a tackle on a tight end, to essentially, I wouldn't say save their season, but stay in contention. And that is nuts. But that is gutsy. That is, what wins even playoff games. You really show whether or not you have to or show that you have the balls to do something and to execute something that most teams wouldn't be willing to do in the playoffs. Not every play, but when it comes down to it, who can outwit the other? And that's what it comes down to. And with that being said, I'm picking Tampa Bay for this game. They're favored by 3, which isn't a lot, but it's going to, I think it was a tall task, for Washington to be able to win as many games as they did this season, with their team, but they clearly have, and I wouldn't say it's a fluke. It's definitely not a fluke. I just think that there are definitely some games that they should have dropped. The one against the Eagles where Hurts went out, like I mentioned earlier, but I just think that this could really show the limitations of the Commanders against a Buccaneers team that, while they have a worse record, I just think that they are a much more well-rounded and complete team in terms of talent. So I'm picking the Buccaneers, and that will move us on to Monday night. We've got Rams-Vikings. The Rams hosting the Vikings. The Vikings team that we know, they kind of squeaked by the Packers a couple of weeks ago due to the Packers' mistakes and lackluster first half. And then the Rams, they were entering the final week, guaranteed to get in the playoffs, rested their starters, which I wholeheartedly agree with their team, because they've been kind of injury prone this year. Puka and Kupp, they, while really good wide receivers, they've gotten banged up at times. And, obviously Stafford is really good. He actually he has some knowledge about playing against some of the guys on the Packers defense. He knows about Harrison Smith. He's a very smart quarterback. I don't expect him, even with how Flores likes to blitz the QB, I kind of expect, this to be like, who can, like I said, outwit the other, but what can the what can the Rams do to really eliminate this pass rush? And I think that, Puka, they've been using him in a lot of short yardage where he gets a lot of yak yards after the catch and that sort of thing. And I kind of expect them to do that kind of thing as well. And it's like, you look at the way the Vikings played the final week of the season, I just think the Lions wanted it a lot more, and I just wonder, obviously the Vikings, everyone said you could score at will on the Lions. But the Vikings were unable to with, one of the best wide receiver tandems in the league. And I do think that they kind of misplayed it, not running it as much. They were too one-dimensional in the red zone. But if a team like the Lions is banged up as they are, that's going to give a lot of hope to the Rams, to play hard, to do well, and to overall, make this a game. And I think this could easily also become a shootout. I think that the Rams do have the weapons. They haven't been, they're very inconsistent with their points, but I think that McVay is going to, I think that McVay is obviously going to really dial it up. And he obviously knows Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell knows him. They obviously with their Super Bowl run, Kevin O'Connell was the offensive coordinator. It makes it a very interesting game and hard to predict. I think people think that the Vikings, they got whooped last week. They're going to come back swinging, and I expect them to. But I think that people don't realize that when you know someone this well and that sort of thing, it's just, you've really got to go kind of against the norm, and then you're going against the norm with what you're not comfortable with, and perhaps that affects this game. But I will say this, I am going to go with the Vikings to win this game. I think that their defense can force a bit more pressure on Stafford, and while Stafford's a guy who's good against pressure, he's not just gonna throw the ball away for an interception. I think that I'm just gonna have to go with the Vikings. I think that they have more talent. I wouldn't necessarily say they're better coached, because I think that the Rams, I think that people going into the season thought that the Rams, with their defense and with the Donald retiring and all that, they were going to be kind of, were they going to be able to be good enough on defense to be able to compete? But I think that they've been better on defense than people think. I think that their offense is what really needs to lead and take charge, though, and we'll really see, whatnot. But I'm taking the Vikings for this game, much to my dismay. I don't think that they make a first-round exit in the playoffs. But that's all the games. If you guys, I know it was a little bit longer. I really wanted to kind of go in depth on what I thought about these games and that sort of thing. If you have any comments, or questions on things that I think about the games further, feel free to send them in the comments. But if you want NFL content like this, twice a week on Tuesday and Friday, then feel free to subscribe for more NFL content. But this is Cast, and I'm your host, Casty Streeter, and as always, go Pack Go.